out of control, anger that will not yield even under the CCP's repression, riots spreading across the nation, attacks on government offices, coup rumors and ruthless purges, a power struggle inside the CCP racing towards self-destruction. How long can Xi Jinping's rule possibly hold out? A public open letter from a former top leadership insider: Chinese soldiers do not become the party's Praetorian Guard. 2025. The worst retreat. Per delivery rates collapse from 2 yuan to 0.2 yuan. Courier outlets pushed to the cliff edge. 180,000 locations. Confiscation of old electric bikes and forced sales of new models. Consumer refusal. Mass store closures. The new national standards pushed by the CCP were nothing short of a catastrophe. Welcome to the truth about China, out of control. Anger that does not break under the CCP's crackdown is exploding across the entire country. Riots and attacks on public institutions are occurring one after another, and China's endless economic slide is driving the tension of the whole society to its absolute limit. In rural areas in particular, that tension is rising at an alarming speed. According to data from independent monitoring organizations, as of the end of November 2025, the number of protest incidents in China's rural regions increased by roughly 70% compared with the entirety of 2024. This trend shows that economic deterioration is no longer confined to macro indicators, but is rapidly spreading into the lowest layers of society. According to the China Dissent Monitor, under the umbrella of US-based Freedom House, in the first 11 months of this year alone, more than 660 protest actions in rural areas were recorded. Many of them are related to land expropriation, forced eviction, land disputes, unpaid wages, strikes, and backlash against local government policies. International media, including the British newspaper The Guardian, reported a case in Linggao County, Hainan Province, where residents protested after local authorities attempted to remove a small Taoist temple. Even if the scale was small, similar eruptions of anger have been repeatedly reported across rural China. For decades, hundreds of millions of rural residents went to cities as migrant workers, carrying the core of China's economic growth. But once the growth engine stalled, employment shrank, and the property sector slumped, vast numbers of migrant workers have been returning to their hometowns as if forced back. Ironically, there is still no work in the countryside. Local government debt has ballooned to around 44 trillion yuan, about 860 trillion won, and authorities have intensified land seizures to secure funds. In many cases, compensation is shockingly insufficient, destroying the foundation of rural livelihoods and deepening feelings of loss and injustice. Researchers point out that many of those returning have not yet reached retirement age, and that they carry expectations formed in urban life, as well as higher social and political awareness. When they face unemployment, unstable income, and a lack of opportunity, that frustration easily turns into protest. Rural protests may not immediately become a direct challenge to central power, but dissatisfaction spreading at the grassroots level is becoming increasingly uncontrollable. The recent situation has already gone beyond the realm of isolated disputes. In one area of Hainan Province, a fruit tree company secretly cut down betel nut trees, farmers' main source of income, late at night, and after this was discovered, large-scale protests erupted. Residents gathered in front of the company's offices, overturned vehicles, threw stones, and shouted in rage. According to residents' testimony, thousands of betel nut trees that should have been entering harvest season were destroyed. Farmers claimed they held valid and legal proof of land use rights, and the incident triggered a fierce public backlash. This is not just a Hainan problem. At the end of November, in parts of Yunnan and Guizhou provinces, thousands of residents poured into the streets to protest the government's forced cremation policy. These protests were said to have been spontaneously organized by farmers and to have continued for nearly a month. Against this backdrop, last November, Chinese authorities issued an unusual public directive. Local governments must strictly prevent large-scale return of migrant workers and their prolonged stay in rural areas. Outside observers interpret this as an attempt to prevent broader turmoil before it erupts. At the same time, internet controls have been further strengthened, and some local governments are constructing additional censorship barriers known as a wall within the wall. Yuan Chengping, a Chinese legal scholar who fled to Australia, says civic resistance in China is now showing new and clear characteristics. Protests are expanding from cities to rural areas, from online to real life, from economic grievances to broader social issues, taking diverse forms nationwide. He argues that the protests of 2025 reflect deep popular despair, showing that Chinese people fear not hardship itself, but the absence of hope above all. And he points to another defining feature of today's protests: their growing political nature. Factory workers demanding fair treatment, smashing machines. Chinese workers enraged by unpaid wages are seeing their actions expand into an uncontrollable wave of violence. The shadow of China's trade collapse as the world turns its back. Ordinary people who cannot escape poverty no matter how hard they work day and night, falling into a life like slavery. Across the country, ghost cities alone number 50. Empty, ugly, new districts revealing a shocking face, Xi Jinping's dream shattered into pieces. Rumors that Hu Chunhua is implicated in the Banqi case and under investigation. Ma Shi, Mashiku, repeatedly absent from meetings, on a de facto path to political collapse. Thai forces launching heavy strikes on voice-phishing compounds inside Cambodia. Chinese netizens cheering, saying it feels satisfying. Welcome to the truth about China. Burning factories, smashing machines to pieces. Chinese workers enraged by unpaid wages are seeing their actions spread into an uncontrollable wave of violence. Recently, as China's economic downturn deepens, unpaid wages have emerged as a serious social problem. Workers who shed blood and sweat but still cannot obtain the compensation they deserve can no longer endure it, and are being driven into extreme choices. As protests take increasingly violent forms, setting factories on fire, destroying machinery, the situation is escalating by the day. But CCP authorities, instead of offering fundamental solutions, are responding with hardline measures, detaining and punishing workers, without exception. Social conflict is rising like a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion. Recently, one video set social media on fire. A man standing at the edge of a cliff ties a rope around an excavator, carefully adjusts its position, and then, at the next moment, lets go of the rope. A massive excavator weighing tens of tons plummets straight down the cliff and shatters into pieces. That man was none other than the excavator operator. After demanding payment for months of unpaid wages and being ignored again and again, he ultimately destroyed his own machine, his means of survival, as a protest against the contractor. The video shocked Chinese netizens. Many said he must have been driven to the edge, and it's karma for the vicious bosses who stole his wages, empathizing with the worker's situation. But behind that fleeting sense of catharsis, a far harsher reality awaits. An excavator worth around 100 million won is now scrap metal, and the operator may not only fail to recover his unpaid wages, but could face criminal punishment and massive compensation liability, charged with property destruction and even the so-called offense of malicious wage claims. In the end, every risk falls entirely on the weakest person, the worker. Another video reveals the same desperation. A worker parks his excavator at the cliff's edge and delivers a final ultimatum to the boss. I don't need all 6 months of wages. If you don't transfer the money by 9 a.m. today, I'll go down with this excavator. The cry of someone willing to throw away his life, not for money, but to make his injustice seen, captures in raw detail the psychological collapse of people pushed to the edge. Such extreme actions are no longer rare. As the end of the year approaches, wage arrears disputes are erupting across China like a dam bursting. Even inside China, migrant workers are treated as disposable. Skyscrapers and bridges were built with their blood and sweat, yet once construction ends, they are often chased away with nothing. To claim their right to survive, workers hang banners, climb cranes, and finally even demolish and set fire to the very buildings they built, resisting through destructive methods. In May this year, a major fire broke out at a textile factory in Yibin City, Sichuan province. Black smoke burned for 37 hours. Inside that smoke lived the fury of a single worker. Because the factory owner refused to pay 800 yuan in back wages, about 15,000 yen, To the end, a worker surnamed Yuan set the factory on fire. Netizen reactions were divided. Some criticized, does it make sense to burn even co-workers' workplace over just 15,000 yen? But others insisted, if he wasn't desperate, he wouldn't bet his life on 15,000 yen. This is proof of how desperate ordinary people have become. Some even began calling him Brother 800 and turning him into a folk hero, reflecting deep resentment among ordinary people toward the unjust society under CCP rule. Arson protests, setting factories on fire to get wages paid, are spreading. Since the end of 2024, news of factory fires has been coming in from everywhere. According to the broadcaster Sound of Hope, in February this year, a large fire also broke out at a warehouse in Haier's industrial park in Chongqing, burning it to the ground. Insiders said the fire was likely retaliatory arson by workers who never received their wages. In this environment, a strange term has emerged to tighten the noose around workers: malicious wage claims. Around 2020, a construction company executive named Li Baozhong first promoted the concept, arguing that workers who protest to demand wages should be placed on the social credit blacklist. His logic was that workers, the weak, use aggressive methods to disrupt social order. But reality is contradiction itself. Li Baozhong's own construction company was a habitual wage defaulter, dragged into thousands of lawsuits. Li himself reportedly failed to repay debts of tens of billions of yuan and was placed on a court sanctions list. The public is furious. Who is malicious here? Isn't this a term invented to protect companies that refuse to pay? Even though it is not codified clearly as law, malicious wage claims is increasingly becoming a universal club used to suppress workers' protests. Authorities slap workers with charges like creating disorder or threatening public safety and punish them ruthlessly, while bosses who have withheld wages for months or years often receive only light penalties. The root cause of all of this is directly tied to the collapse of the real estate bubble that once made up roughly 30% of China's GDP. As the bubble burst, countless projects halted. Developers whose money lines dried up began defaulting on payments to subcontractors and workers. Local governments that once relied on land sales for revenue have also sunk under mountains of debt, losing the capacity to discipline companies. Even official statistics show new construction starts have dropped to less than half, and the number of migrant construction workers has fallen by more than 30%. Behind those numbers are abandoned work sites, breadwinners who lost their jobs, and workers driven to extremes just to survive. The tragedy of migrant workers protesting unpaid wages is the bare, exposed wound of a collapsing Chinese economy. For the ruling class obsessed only with maintaining power, the suffering of ordinary people is nothing but a hollow echo. Unless structural contradictions are resolved, workers who rise up saying, even if it's illegal, I will get my money back, will remain the most unjustly sacrificed victims of this enormous political catastrophe. The shadow of China's trade collapse as the world turns its back. Ordinary people falling into poverty and a slave-like life, no matter how hard they work day and night. Hello, and today again, I ran around all day meeting clients. Every time you meet business partners, you hear the same story. Orders from North America and Europe have visibly decreased. Trade people say they can feel the drop month after month. The reason is an open secret everyone knows. Relations between China and Western countries continue to deteriorate, and Western companies are cutting China out of supply chains, moving orders to Southeast Asia or India. The fallout has already become reality on the ground. Countless processing factories are on the verge of shutting down. Online, some people still boast, trade war doesn't matter. So what if exports drop? But reality is brutal. When exports collapse, domestically oriented manufacturing instantly enters a danger zone. Even some listed companies that once ran 24 hours a day now have logistics yards that used to be packed with trucks, yet today they are empty. Some days you barely see one or two vehicles. Many days there's no work at all. Layoffs have become unavoidable. Some companies suddenly fire 200 people at once. Those who remain cling to meaningless paperwork, trying desperately to keep cash flow alive. Income has crashed. Workers sigh, this year I only worked 3 months in total. Many are forced into revolving credit card debt just to live. I work myself to the bone all year, and what's left is only 40,000 yuan, about 780,000 won. That year-end tally from one worker is nothing but bitterness. The lower end of the service sector is just as bleak. Even working 12 hours a day without a single day off, the money left in hand is only a few thousand yuan per month, roughly 80,000 won. With that, you're chained to the workplace, social life is impossible, and saving money is unthinkable. A restaurant owner says, stunned, "From last night until lunch today, sales were zero." A street vendor says, "I sold from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. and couldn't even make 20,000 won. I've never seen a downturn like this." The shadow of recession has spread to traditional markets, the kitchens of ordinary people. Even large markets, which should be busiest in the morning, have no customers. Not even shadows. Vegetables are piled up like mountains. But no one is buying. A morning market being emptier than the night market. "This is the first time I've ever seen it," a merchant says, showing just how severe it has become. Even the rental market is collapsing. Across Guangzhou, vacant rooms overflow. A room that used to rent for 700 yuan can't find tenants even at 500. Real estate agents say, "From September, transactions completely stopped. We gave up on year-end targets a long time ago." Meanwhile, wage cuts are blowing even colder. Companies are announcing that from December, they will cut monthly pay by a flat 500 yuan. Working 6 days a week, 13-hour Saturdays, no holidays. Being squeezed without mercy, yet wages go down instead of up. It is absurd beyond words. More and more workers are breaking down, saying, "I can't hold on anymore." The reality for new college graduates is even harsher. Even from top universities, it's hard to get a starting salary of 6,000 yuan. Many are forced into jobs paying 3,000 to 5,000 yuan, about 80,000 won, or into chemical plants at 4,000 yuan. At a semiconductor company in Hefei, a cohort of graduates held on with monthly pay of net yuan. But after 2 years, they said, "There is no future," and all resigned. The downturn has even changed the scenery of cities. Even the pedestrian shopping streets of Shanghai, a city of about 4 million, are empty. Malls, restaurants, hair salons, everything is silent. Even in Sanya, a resort city, large malls have almost no customers at 7 p.m., the golden time. Shops stay open, but only rent keeps bleeding away. Meanwhile, train stations are getting crowded again, not because the economy recovered, but because people's paths to survival have been blocked, and they are returning to their hometowns early in an early homecoming tide. People clutching huge bags, sitting on the floor waiting for trains. In the last 2 years, life has become even more difficult. Even business owners and entertainers who once lived well are now jumping into live commerce just to raise cash. Even the upper layers of society must drop their dignity to survive. This is not a temporary downturn. The crisis has already sunk deep into the structure of the economy, and it is reshaping Chinese society into something darker and more painful. At least 50 ghost cities nationwide. Empty, ugly, new districts exposing a shocking face. Xi Jinping's dream shattered to pieces. A blogger films the streets of Langfang and says, "Shops are being listed for sale one after another. Rents have dropped, and many places have zero transfer fees. In the past, you couldn't even imagine this. It's Sunday, but there are almost no people on the street. Where did all those shoppers go?" What is happening in Langfang is not a brief economic dip. It is a clear signal that the consumption engine itself has stopped. Even on weekends, large malls are empty. Stores pour into the market in waves and rents crash. This is not a temporary drop in demand. It reveals the cold reality that incomes have collapsed to the point that even basic consumption can no longer be sustained. Langfang was once touted as a core satellite city between Beijing and Tianjin, celebrated as a beneficiary of the capital region integration strategy. But this model carried a fatal flaw. Without jobs and industry, you cannot push a city forward first. The property bubble, fueled by speculative capital, covered that defect. But the moment the bubble burst, the hollow structure was exposed.